The afternoon heat lay over the steppe like a metal lid, and then the earth began to thunder, a sound that smelled of diesel and fear and would not stop. That is where the story of how Su-152 crews disabled German heavy tanks at Kursk must begin, not with a diagram of steel, but with a field full of men whose work was to take the monstrous, well-armored machines of the Wehrmacht and render them harmless by any means necessary. The through line here is plain and ruthless. These crews did not win by punching holes through the thick, polished armor of Tiger I or Panther tanks. They won by thinking of those behemoths as salvage problems, as engines and tracks and human bodies to be broken rather than simply pierced. The Su-152 was born of improvisation, an artillery piece married to a tank chassis, and that mismatch was its greatest virtue on the Kursk salient. Stowed behind a low, sloped casemate was a 152mm gun-howitzer, a weapon designed to lob demolition rather than to bite through armor. From the crewman's cramped viewport, the enemy tank head looked almost aristocratic, a high, flat frontal plate, bolts, and a command cupola like a crown. To the thinly crewed Su-152, attacking that crown head-on was suicide. So crews learned to treat the enemy not as armor to be outgunned, but as a machine to be unmade. In the first hours of encounter, the men of the Su batteries felt what every tank crew knows. The universe closes down to the width of a gun sight and the ticking of a clock. Their gunners had to master the howitzer's temperament, the long, two-staged recoil that made accurate direct fire tricky at close range, the way the heavy shell made the whole vehicle shudder like a heart attack. But recoil also brought opportunity. A single 152mm high-explosive shell hitting the ground beside a Tiger I could send a concussion through its running gear, shear road wheel bolts, pop track links, and rupture torsion bars. Not every hit would make a neat, glorious explosion through the front plate. Many of the knockouts were ugly, mechanical deaths. A gap between road wheels, a cracked engine block, fuel lines rent open and turning a crew's armored cocoon into an oven. The psychological landscape was as important as the physical. German tank crews trusted their armor. They rode like cathedral bells in a fortress of steel, confident that the thick frontal plates could laugh off most punches. 152 crews faced that confidence directly. They learned how fear could be engineered. A salvo that stomped into the ground in front could throw dirt and shrapnel into vision slits, clog turrets, and make commanders order slow, cautious maneuvers. When one heavy tank limped to a halt, others hesitated, forming a knot on the field. Soviet fire discipline turned that momentary paralysis into opportunity. A follow-up shot aimed at the running gear, another at the engine deck, and the supposed invincible tank became a hulking wreck with smoke pouring from its vents. The sight of a Tiger I stalled, its crew climbing out, blinking from burning metal, cut through the German myth of invulnerability as surely as a shell cut through a fuel tank. There were technical quirks that favored the Soviet approach, and these were among the hidden truths that many commanders missed. The ML-20S howitzer's projectile did not require direct penetration to be lethal. Its blast radius and fragmentation patterns were optimized for demolition. When it struck near a Panther's side, the splinters could sever control linkages or pierce thin roof plates and detonate stored ammunition. Su crews learned to fire at specific weak points, not always visible to an outside observer. The connection points of the track, the flange around the engine hatch, the junctions where road wheel bearings met axles. A burst to those places could immobilize a tank forever. Another little-known advantage was the Su's mass. The chassis borrowed from a heavy tank made the Hunter itself feel like a bunker. Crews who could dig in on reverse slopes could give and take punishment while their big shells did the talking. Training and temperament mattered. Many Su-152 crews were artillerymen pressed into armored service. Men practiced in counting angles and ranges rather than in the sudden intimacy of turret fights. That artillery instinct favored deliberate, prepare-and-strike patterns over impulsive duels. They measured distances in paces and seconds. They learned to hold fire until the enemy rolled into a trap that maximized the concussion effect. There were also supply constraints that shaped tactics. Ammunition for a 152mm gun was heavy and limited. Each round was precious, and crews had to make each count. That scarcity forced a discipline that paradoxically made them deadlier. Their shots were not a machine gun storm, but a measured, devastating hammer. The battlefield at Kursk turned into a theater of engineered blunders and split-second ingenuity. One afternoon, a battery of Su-152s lay concealed behind a knoll as a platoon of Tiger ones crested a ridge. The Tigers steamed forward, oblivious of the menace they could not see. The first shell slammed into the ground a matter of 5 meters from the lead Tiger, and the earth took the blast and passed it along in a hammering that sounded like 1,000 boots. The lead tank's tracks derailed. A torsion bar fractured, and for the briefest of seconds, the armored monster shuddered and listed. The German commander ordered reverse, and then stopped, confused by gauges that flickered and vents that spit black smoke. Then the second Su-152 fired. A precise plunging hit to the engine deck spat flames and sent the crew climbing out in a rush of smoke and curses. In that flurry, 2 concentrated surgical demolitions, the entire German advance lost its teeth. This was the battlefield's aha moment. It was not the gun's ability to punch through armor that mattered so much as its power to make the tank immobile, to force human crews into the cold arithmetic of escape or surrender. At the climax of those encounters, the senses betrayed the men. The air was thick with the copper tang of cordite, the clank of metal as tracks came free, the high, fascinated hum of cooling steel, and over it all, the muted screams of radio static and human voices shouting orders. An Su-152 crew that had a successful hit felt a strange relief and sudden fatigue, the kind that comes after a shipment of adrenaline has been spent. They had not shattered a legendary frontal plate. They had done something quieter and remorseless. They had taken a working enemy tank and turned it into scrap, into an obstacle that would not bear down on infantry or shield an attack. Those victories were not cheap. The Su crews paid in blood for every disabled enemy. The Germans, when they could, would call in artillery or dive bombers that could finish what a 152mm shell had begun. Many disabled tanks were stripped of fuel and left burning on the steppe, their crews dead or taken prisoner. The Soviet factories kept feeding the front with Su-152s, but production could not replace the seasoned men whose eyes had learned distance and whose hands had steadied those heavy shells. The human cost was written in lost names. By the end, what mattered was less the technology than the combination of purpose, improvisation, and brutal clarity of aim. Su-152 crews altered the dynamic of tank versus tank combat not by inventing a better anti-armor round, but by reframing the enemy as a thing to be sabotaged, immobilized, and neutered. Their wins at Kursk illustrated a wider truth about modern warfare. That victory often grows from the ability to remove an adversary's options rather than annihilate his tools outright. For anyone who has crawled into a cramped fighting compartment and listened to the world fold itself into the squeeze of a sight, that lesson is intimate and sharp. When the guns fell silent and the smoke thinned on those Kursk fields, farmers would, for decades afterward, find fragments of 152mm shell casings and twisted track links. The machines remained. The stories remained. The Su-152 crews had done something both practical and profound. They proved that even the most fearsome weapon could be defeated by breaking the little things that kept it running. Track pins, oil lines, cruise nerves, until the great machine lay still. That is why their actions mattered. Not because they shattered the myth of armored invincibility in a single stroke, but because they taught a generation how to make the impossible manageable, one precise, punishing shot at a time.